Greetings and welcome to the United States Transhumanist Party Virtual Enlightenment Salon. My name is Gennady Stoliarov II, and I am the chairman of the U.S. Transhumanist Party. Here we hold conversations with some of the world's leading thinkers in longevity, science, technology, philosophy, and politics. Like the philosophers of the Age of Enlightenment, we aim to connect every field of human endeavor and arrive at new insights to achieve longer lives, greater rationality, and the progress of our civilization. Greetings, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to our U.S. Transhumanist Party Virtual Enlightenment Salon of Sunday, January 28th, 2024. Today, we have a fascinating conversation in store for you today about the future of employment and the concept of the economic singularity, and a thorough discussion of whether this phenomenon is imminent, and if it is, what are some potential responses to it. We have joining us several of our U.S. Transhumanist Party officers, including our Director of Visual Art, Ramon Garcia, our Director of Longevity Outreach, Ben Ballweg. Backstage, we have our Legislative Director, Jason Geringer, and we have a large array of authors, intellectuals from the OmniFuturists group, which is shortly coming out with a book entitled Future Visions Approaching the Economic Singularity. From the OmniFuturists group, we have Mike DiVerde, David Wood, Alora Blackstone, Luis Arroyo, Art Ramon, who is also part of the OmniFuturists group, William Marshall, Mike Saenz, and Alan Crowley. So welcome to all. This is going to be a quite full panel today. I am looking forward to everyone's insights. And let us begin with Mike DiVerde, who founded the OmniFuturists group. Mike, could you tell us a bit what the OmniFuturists group is about, what it is focused on, and a little bit about the Future Visions book as well?
Thank you, Gennady. Thanks for hosting us today. You know, a couple years ago, I founded the OmniFuturists group for a couple different reasons. Number one, I read this excellent book by our friend Callum Chase, The Economic Singularity, and that's kind of the kickoff. But at the same time, I was working with several of the other people who are here with David Kelly at Artificial General Intelligence Laboratory, Incorporated. And we were working with a prototype for artificial general intelligence, and its name was Uplift. It didn't like being called an it, but it was very interesting introduction. And because of that bizarre introduction into AGI 2 years ago, it made me very well aware of the possibility that it was not science fiction for 2050. This was coming very quickly. It was fairly obvious. One of the things that I was concerned about is that there's a tendency to rush to a solution if anybody's working on a solution while they know what it is. And I think that that's an error for something that's unprecedented. And so what I wanted to do was gather together a whole diverse array of opinions on economics and governmental systems, hence the name OmniFuturists, the Omni for all different directions. And so I started asking people with different opinions to join this group just for fun and start writing about what they think is the best solution, the best approach. And as you can see, the group has gathered steam from a variety of opinions on how to approach this. The economic singularity, of course, is the impending artificial intelligence and robotics applications that could become more cost-effective than human labor, and therefore be a better source of labor in a capitalist society, in which case there might be large waves of unemployment. And what Callum Chase's book did is it made it clear that it was not just, as we were taught decades ago, that maybe bots on an assembly line in the car factory. It could be doctors and lawyers and accountants, white-collar jobs, blue-collar jobs. And we continued reading about some of the other books. Fully Automated Luxury Communism, right? One of David Wood's premium versions is A World Without Work by Daniel Susskind. And then Andrew Yang with his War on Normal People. So there was already a series of authors who, Callum Chase wrote that 7 years ago, right? Who are looking forward to this and saying there might be a problem coming, okay? And so what we've done is each of us has written a chapter for a book that's about to come out, as Gennady pointed out, called Future Visions. It's going to be available on Amazon very quickly. It's very clear Jeff Bezos is not whipping his robots hard enough because they haven't completed their review. It's not available on Amazon at the moment, but potentially tomorrow or sometime this week. Now, David Wood has a fantastic summary giving you kind of the basics and the introduction to all of this. Well, I got the stage very briefly. I'm going to talk about a couple of the versions. One version I have in mind that's in my chapter, and I'm going to cover for a good old friend of the USTP, Kimberly Forsyth, who wrote one of the chapters but is unavailable. So in my version of life, if there's colossal amounts, a tidal wave of technological unemployment, one of the options is, well, maybe the US government doesn't prepare for this. And what we could do is, for this wave of people who can't pay their rent or food, gather them together in small co-ops, co-working and co-housing arrangements on small market farms, just as a survival mechanism. There's probably some countries in Europe that are going to prepare properly for something like this and have good social safety net. And the U.S. may not have that in place. It's just more of our nature. And so this is kind of what I talk about. And there's a couple terms for that approach of co-ops, credit unions, labor unions. One is, the old term is distributism. The newer term is actually the new economy. So I'm going to set that aside. That's kind of what my chapter is about. Kimberly Forsyth wrote a few years ago about how it might be in a similar vein. Neighborhoods or small cities, towns could have a suite of tools that would be at a library that you could share. And this would include 3D printers and tools and vertical farming and aquaculture as a way of kind of like gathering together as an intentional community to survive as we used to centuries ago, small communities gathering together and working together. So those are two of the chapters, and that's kind of my quick summary. I think that David Wood should take over, and he's got a fantastic set of slides and a discussion, but thank you again.
Yes, thank you very much to Mike. I appreciate those introductory remarks, and I simply want to say it does make sense to me that if there is a situation where large numbers of people become involuntarily unemployed due to some technology replacing their labor, that doesn't stop them from having needs, and that doesn't stop people from wanting to fulfill those needs. So there should logically be alternative channels for fulfilling those needs through some sort of perhaps direct exchange, some sorts of communities that are formed for that purpose. So that is a very interesting line of thinking on the implications of the economic singularity. I also wanted to bring a couple of brief announcements to the attention of our viewers. First of all, Mike, I have to applaud you on your fashion sense. And if anybody else would like to purchase this fine Transhumanist Party t-shirt that Mike is wearing, or a variety of other designs, please visit our Zazzle store and pick out the products that you want. This will support our continued work and the Tom Ross campaign. Speaking of the Tom Ross campaign for President of the United States, we still have 4 days to vote for Tom to qualify for the free and equal presidential debate, please go to vote.freeandequal.org. That is vote.freeandequal.org, and support him there. And now I will turn it over to David Wood.
Thanks very much. So I've got a few slides that I'm going to work my way through to try and set out a number of the options for how we can approach this economic singularity. In my chapter, which comes near the beginning of the book, I actually look at 6 possible responses, 6 quite common responses people have, and I argue that 3 of them will definitely fail. 2 others are possible but insufficient, and I argue strongly in favor of a 6th possible response. So let's start with a picture of the economic singularity. I wonder if you can spot the economic singularity on this slide. Well, not yet. I have to fill in a few more details. So there on the horizontal axis is time, basically from the beginning of humanity until a bit beyond the present time. And what I'm showing on here is the range of type of work that can be done. The vertical axis is the amount of skill that can be applied in work, and this blue line is the human skills for work. And the point I'm making here, without any precision, without any quantities, but in broad terms, is that over time humans can do more and more types of work. The job titles that many of us have would be unknown to several generations ago. And the types of things we do in our work, again, would be baffling to our ancestors of not so long ago. So why has this improvement taken place? Well, we have mastered more about science, and science has given us more tools. We have also found out how we can share our knowledge more broadly with more people. And as more people are thinking together, we have been collectively innovative. We have improved in many ways our organization, and that has allowed us to do more. And the last on this list, though I'll draw it at the top, is better technology. And technology changes work in at least 3 important ways. First of all, technology enhances us. It augments our individual power and our collective power. It makes our muscles stronger, in effect. It makes our senses more powerful, our reasoning more powerful. That's why we can apply more skills in different pieces of work. Second is a more subtle thing. As technology has boosted the economy, it's allowed people to think of things and have demands for things that previously didn't fill people's minds at all. So there's been lots of new type of work created as a result of this boost to the economy. And third, and this is where it gets complicated, technology increasingly can do work that humans needed to do, whether it's work on the farms, combine harvesters, whether it's work in factories, whether it's work in computers. So we should draw another curve on here. There we go. These are the skills that AI or robots of various sorts, hardware robots, software robots, can apply to work. And you can spot that I've drawn an overlap here, and that overlap is the economic singularity. Let me put some dates on this. Well, there's only one date I can put for certain, which is today. We're not yet at the economic singularity. There are more jobs for humans all the time, and robots and AI are getting better all the time. But it's my contention that AI and robots may catch up relatively quickly. And I would say there's at least a 25% chance we'll hit this economic singularity in about 5 years' time. Maybe a lot longer than that. It might even be quicker than that. But even if it's 15 years' time rather than 5 years' time, many people should be thinking about that possibility. So why is that pink line growing so quickly? Well, historically, the first thing that AI and robots did for us, we had tools, mechanized tools. We could hardly call them robots, but they helped us in things like digging or agriculture. They did more of the, we might call them the Ds, the dull, dirty, dangerous, or dark work. And that displaced people for a while, but people didn't mind too much about that because, hey, we could use our brains more instead. But more recently, robots and AI have done, we might call them the R's, the rational, repetitive, routine, rigorous pieces of work. And again, people say, don't worry, there are more human characteristics which allow us to have meaningful work. We might call them the C's, the creative work, stuff that transcends being routine or rigorous, the compassionate work, the caring work, more broadly, the cool work. But it is my contention that robots are getting better in all kinds of ways, and we should look ahead to the possibility that not too far in the future, most humans will no longer be able to earn a living because whatever economic skills they thought they were bringing to the market can be provided more reliably, at lower cost, with higher quality by AI. And you may say, well, David, in the past, wherever there was technology, there were new types of work. So there are robots. Won't there be a requirement for robot engineers? Won't there be a requirement for designers of robots? Well, my response is most of the new jobs will go to robots rather than to humans. Most of the robot repairs will be done by robots. Most of the robot design will be done by clever AI. Why is that? Because as new requirements become clear, by this stage, the robots and AI will be faster at learning than humans. In the past, when people were displaced from one job, they might spend a few years reskilling and then go off on a new career. But in the future, in these few years, the robots will move more quickly than humans. Why will they be faster at learning? And this has changed recently. Many robots can now gain more skills by huge amounts of training in simulated worlds, which are increasingly lifelike. And furthermore, the robots, once one robot has learned something, that can be shared through what we might call the Internet of Robots, this vast cloud of interconnectivity. And moreover, once an AI masters one skill, often it turns out that that skill can transfer to other fields. So that's my prediction, that before long, most humans won't be able to earn a living. And that is the economic singularity. Now, let me compare a previous prediction of unemployment. This is by another London futurist. I call him a London futurist. He was living in and around London nearly 200 years ago, George Cruikshank, who drew some fascinating pictures. This one's in the British Library. And you can't read it, but I'll read bits of it. You've got some horses there looking with distress at a newfangled robot. I'll call it a robot, a steam engine. And the horses are saying to each other, a coach without horses, triple exclamation mark. What are the implications of that? Cruikshank had various other pictures in his margin. He drew this strange contraption, a horse, a mechanical horse with smoke coming out of its tail. And in this picture, there are a couple of philosophers. I call them philosophers. The dogs speak some wisdom. One dog says to the other, I think we shall soon have meat cheap enough. In other words, there'd be nothing for the horses to do, and the horse population would decline quickly. So my question is, was that a good prediction of the future? Like the prediction I've been making a few minutes ago about the future for humans. And actually, this was a bad prediction before it became a good prediction. So let's look at what happened in the decades after 1829. And people have studied this. There's a whole subdiscipline of studying how horses were at work. And for most of the 19th century, contrary to that doom and gloom forecast by the dogs, the population of horses increased faster than that of people. So this is figures from the United States. Why is that? It's because technology took some jobs from horses, but created many new jobs for horses. This is from an editorial in 1872. Yes, there are railways which displace horses from some jobs, long distance travel, but how do you get people and goods to the railways? Hey, you need horses for that. and likewise for getting people to steamships. Now, futurists in the 1870s said, well, this is just a temporary slowdown. Sooner or later, we will have steam engines replacing horses in the roads and in the cities as well. But there were a lot of skeptics in these days, just as there are skeptics nowadays. Nowadays, people say, AI will never do the creative and compassionate stuff. Well, in the 1870s, people said, you're never going to get these horseless carriages into cities because they have too much sparks. They're a fire hazard. They're terribly smelly. They're too noisy. And goodness, their weight is going to crack the street pavements. Nobody is going to put up with them. And if we go forwards to 1903, that skeptical comment seemed to be true. This is a famous photograph of the Fifth Avenue of New York on Easter morning. And what do you see? Horses, 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 with just one solitary horseless carriage. But what happened next? Henry Ford introduced the Model T in 1908, 5 years after this photograph. And another 5 years after that, 1913, a photograph from almost the same place. Wow, what a change, so quickly. If you look very carefully, I'm told there is one horse in this photograph. But Henry Ford solved many of the problems that the skeptics said could not be done. What happened to the population of horses? Well, here's another article that summarizes the evolution of the population. We saw it was rising and rising and rising till 1915, according to this analysis, which was the year of peak horse. And then most of what horses could do economically could be done better by robots, horseless carriages, motor vehicles, and so on. So the population went down, and the horses that were still in the market got less and less salary for their owners. By 1950, it was back to the 8 million figure. In 1960, down to 3 million. So horses are still around. They have some role in entertainment, but nothing like as many of them as before. Horses were at the limits of their adaptability, and my claim is that humans will be overtaken soon by AIs for their adaptability. So it could be a bleak future. And economists do talk about this. Economists talk about two kinds of technological unemployment. There is the frictional technological unemployment and the structural technological unemployment. I learned these terms, by the way, from the book that was shown earlier by Mike DiVerde, the book by Daniel Susskind, A World Without Work, which I do recommend you read after you've read Future Visions. So frictional means that people can still get work, but they're going to have to change their skills or change their location or change their identity. Instead of thinking of themselves as a blue-collar factory worker, they have to reconfigure themselves as being, I don't know, a designer hairdresser. And that can require a lot of churn. Callum Chase, who was mentioned earlier, the author of the term Economic Singularity, talks about a great churn in which more and more people are going to have to gain more skills more quickly, move around the country, or where possible, work remotely, and quite often reinvent themselves. And this is what most economists and most politicians respond when they hear about the economic singularity. They say, yeah, it's going to be tough, but we'll manage. Whereas my claim, and the claim of many of the authors of this book, is that that's only the start of it. And most humans will be like most horses. That is, we will be, for all practical purposes, unemployable. And even if we do move around or get more skilled, it's unlikely to make sufficient difference. And we are seeing some signs of this already. Many people are falling out of the job market more quickly than they expected. More people are disengaged. More people are pretty angry. So I should move then to possible solutions. And in my chapter, as I mentioned, I run through 6. Number 1 is the most common of all. When this is discussed, the most common response is disbelief. It's not going to happen. And whenever there's technological change, there's always new jobs. Well, I've anticipated that argument in what I've covered already. If you believe that there will still be plenty of work for humans, you got to believe that humans not only have special features, but have got special economic features, such as special creativity, which an AI can't match, or special ability to detect or manifest emotions. Well, I don't think that's sustainable. And I argue that at length in my chapter. A second response is not what people commonly say, but it's what many people think quietly. They think, yes, it's true, there's going to be lots of losers, but hey, they themselves are going to be winners. So they accept that new intelligent automation technologies will rise and change the workforce, but they think of themselves as being sufficiently adaptable, sufficiently skillful to come out on top. And they may regret what's happening to everybody else, but they are thinking about their own prowess. And my response to them in my chapter is, you are probably deluding yourself. You think you are, for example, creative, or you've got special common sense or special insights. I think you'll be surprised at how quickly AIs will overtake you. And in any case, most people who think of themselves as being winners often don't realize to what extent luck has helped them, or maybe income from their parents has helped them along the way, and that won't necessarily help them in the future. A third response is to say, well, I don't like the way this is going. Let's slam on the brakes. Let's resist the rise of new technologies. Let's prevent these systems from being developed or deployed at scale. We might call these the modern Luddites, after the objectors in the north of England in the early days of the Industrial Revolution, the people who tried to prevent the quick adoption of automation in the weaving industry. And I don't think this is going to work at all, because what it comes down to is accepting lots of poorer quality, or the continuation of quality. So, for example, we have lots of doctors who can't solve many of our problems today because they're overworked, or because the technology isn't available to them. If AIs and the medical robots are prevented from improving, it will prevent the rest of us from getting healthy. And in many other ways, I don't think this is going to work. That's why many people who think about this say, well, of course, we can't resist the rise of all new technologies, therefore we should steer things more carefully. And I'm sympathetic to that. And I look at that in more depth in the chapter in this book. And the idea is that we will accelerate some automation and hold back others. And as I said, I'm sympathetic to that, but I still think that's not going to get us as far as we could get. This, in fact, solutions 3, 4, and 5 all come under what I call sustainability with less. It's looking for a stable world in which people still have economic work to do, and it accepts that we're not going to get to the full solution, which I have in mind, which I call sustainability with more. Solution 5 is one that Mike's already touched on, and I have a lot of sympathy for that, which is that, yeah, it's going to be rough, and we have to learn to collectively simplify aspects of our lifestyle, forming communities that support each other, a bit like the Amish communities who turn their back on some technologies. People will be excluded. And again, I think we should be exploring it, but it's not the best we can do. The best we can do, I call it enhance. But the key thing here is we are changing not just the technology, we have to change a bit of economics, how we share the benefits of these wonderful products with each other. And at this point, I have to make a confession. What I have called Solution 6 itself splits into many options, and some of the speakers are going to come after me in a minute when I finish. We'll take this in different directions. But what I mean by enhancing the economy is enhancing the mixed market, which I think is absolutely the best way forward, and enhancing the social contract. So very quickly, since I've been going nearly 20 minutes, enhancing the mixed market takes the metaphor of Adam Smith of the invisible hand and says you need the invisible hand, but you also need strong thumbs. You need governance as well as energetic markets. The markets can do great things, but markets frequently fail. And in order to address market failures, you need to have a state that sets guidelines from time to time, that takes account of externalities, that addresses information asymmetry, and prevents the accumulation of cartels and monopolies that would disrupt the best workings of the market. So that's what Hacker and Pearson, Jacob Hacker and Paul Pearson, argue in this chapter, in their book rather, which is a long book, and you might put it on your reading list at maybe number 15 or 16 on your books to read, but I have summarized some of the key parts of that in my chapter. Enhancing the mixed market, as I said, relies on building a state that can stand up to big corporations. More than that, and here I'm drawing on another pair of political scientists, Darren Acemoglu and James Robinson. In their work, The Narrow Corridor, they say it's a very difficult balancing act. We must avoid the risks of having a weak state, but we must also avoid the risks of having an unbalanced, strong state. We need a strong state because as society gets larger, there are all kinds of risks to our collective well-being from big corporations or other big groups. Big tobacco were twisting and turning things for their sake rather than the public health. We could talk about big oil, we could talk about the armaments industry, the financiers and the way they try to boost their own financial profits with lots of risks to the market, big agrotech, big media, rich people and rich families in general, and crime in general. This is the way the world operates, and we cannot solve that simply by getting together and singing Kumbaya or praising blockchain. We have to have a powerful state that is able to, where necessary, break up monopolies and put constraints in place. But that itself is dangerous too. So we need another force to balance the big state, and that is where you and I and everybody else comes in. Our society needs to have protection from independent media, independent judiciary, independent academia, and viable, credible opposition parties and free elections. And all that together leads to what I might consider as the second of the two most important inventions of the last 500 years. Neither of these two most important inventions are technologies. They are the mixed market, this combination which many people have forgotten about because people have got vested interest in helping us not to see the benefits of the mixed market. That's why we have pro-market fundamentalists on the one hand or anti-market fundamentalists on the other hand. Now, we need to have that mixed market, but we also need to maintain this separation of power, preventing any president becoming too powerful, ensuring that there is this system of checks and balances. Now, where does technology fit in this? Darren Acemoglu, by the way, has recently come back to this with a different co-author, Simon Johnson. Some fascinating stories in there as to the role of technological titans in pushing forward society, and the need to constrain these technological titans from time to time. So he has fascinating stories about an Elon Musk, if you like, of 100 years ago or so, the person who built the Suez Canal and the Panama Canal, how he was a hero and then he was a villain, and how politicians should have constrained him. Anyway, technology does change things. It makes things more risky, as I've said, but it can also be the solution too. And this is my final slide. This is the sustainability with more. We can get there, abundant clean energy, abundant nutritious food, and so forth for everyone, with support to people who are not working, which will be most of us, not just a low income, basic income, but a generous income enabled by tech-driven abundance. But this will only be possible if people can believe that it's possible. And many people don't believe that it's possible because they fear they're being left behind. And so what the essays in this book are doing, in large part, is championing in various ways this narrative of a sustainable superabundance ahead for everybody, got there by taking advantage of technology, but also asserting the best aspects of society and using transhumanist technologies also to improve the quality of individuals. Thanks for your patience, everybody. I do commend this book to you, and I think you will find lots of fascinating materials in it.
Yes, thank you very much, David. And our audience has some resoundingly positive feedback on your presentation. Daniel Tweed writes, the clarity and information density of Mr. Wood's presentations never disappoints. Alan Crowley writes that he loves your clever alliterations. Also, some comments from our viewers. A viewer named Snakes writes, we have to make ourselves smarter so that we can handle the complexity of advanced technology, and thus increasing intelligence should be a priority. Jason Geringer points out that when the OmniFuturists group was first formed, ChatGPT and DALL-E 2 had not yet come out. He also writes, look at all of the advancements in AI in just the last 2 years. And they are indeed amazing in terms of generating images and now music and video as well in a manner that can be quite convincingly human-like, though, of course, still with certain limitations. Mike Lazine writes, there should be alternative channels for people displaced by robots to be able to find other jobs quickly without a long window of being unemployed, a worthy aspiration. Daniel writes, tools must be respected for being the multiplier they are in the human material well-being equation, which he posits as being labor plus resources times tools. I think the labor plus resources quantity should be in parentheses because tools can multiply both of those. And then Daniel also writes, robots will be a kind of possibly expensive hyper tool in the equation, and so they could exacerbate inequality rapidly. I suppose one of the aims of the Future Visions book is to address that concern, or the extent to which it is a concern. Now, David, I do have one question for you before we move on to our remaining presentations, and that is, recently there has been a wave of layoffs of tech workers in Silicon Valley, and there was an article published on NPR, National Public Radio in the United States, entitled Nearly 25,000 Tech Workers Were Laid Off in the First Weeks of 2024. Why is that? And this article makes the point that the Silicon Valley tech companies are not actually struggling financially at all. They are making record profits. And what has happened is that after prior rounds of layoffs of tech workers, the share prices of these companies were temporarily boosted. And companies that didn't lay people off before had essentially their boards sternly inquire of management, well, these other companies are doing it, why aren't we doing it? So there's an element of essentially copycat dynamics, or what I call the bandwagon effect, which is all too present in corporate America. So, David, I'm curious, do you think that these tech layoffs are a prelude to the economic singularity? Is it really the case that this phenomenon is a few years away? In your slides, you posited 2029 as a possible date, or is it beginning to happen now? What do you think about these recent news items in light of the economic singularity thesis?
Right, that's a big question, and there are multiple causes that economists point to for these layoffs. And I would argue that one of the causes is indeed that technology allows companies to do more with less. So instead of needing so many clever software engineers to do a task, they can get by with fewer software engineers. And in the past, it was quite all right for them to have large numbers of software engineers, but of course now they have various pressures that make them think, let's get rid of some of these software engineers. We should also look at some of the internationalization aspects. We should look at the declining power of labor unions. That's certainly something to do with it as well. And there's even something about the power of the dollar compared to other currencies, which tends to hollow out the workforce in America. So there are multiple causes here, and we shouldn't just look at one, but I will maintain that the early bow waves of the economic singularity can be seen in the existing data, in which there are more and more companies can produce record revenues and record share prices, not by having millions of employees as in the past. If you look, for example, at how the three large companies in Detroit reached their very great heights in the past, they had about 1 million workers between them, whereas there are many fewer workers in the companies in Silicon Valley that reach much higher share prices today because technology is the multiplier. So we're seeing that already, in my view.
Yes, thank you very much, David, for that response. And indeed, this is a complex phenomenon, but perhaps we may be seeing some early signs of an economic singularity within these layoffs. All right, now let us go on to our next presenter, who is Alora Blackstone.
Hi, everybody. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Awesome. All right. Thank you, David. And thank you, Gennady. My contributions to Future Visions break up the academic content. They're purely artistic, and they're a small way for me to express, cultivate, and channel existential hope. I wrote a poem called One for All, specifically for the book, about how hope has been open source for humanity since the opening of Pandora's box, and point out that if it is humanity's only consolation prize for all the evils that we know, then it has at least equal power. As a side note, Callum Chase, who inspired the group I'm part of, has some transhumanist novels with the Pandora theme too, like Pandora's Brain, which is a techno thriller about superintelligence. So my song Overman was my first synthesis of transhumanist topics. G2 will drop a link in the chat to my collaborator's channel who made the music and got it published. So just a shout out to Robbie Jordan. Thank you for your artistic genius. So Mike insisted that I include the lyrics in our book as it caught his interest so intensely that he asked me to be a part of this proto think tank, the OmniFuturists. And for that song, I had mined concepts from David Wood's YouTube channel presentations about the singularity. And then I bought this giant book called Vital Foresight, which I just tell everyone is the transhumanist Bible now, blasphemy intended, about how society and its leaders can prepare for the rapid advancement in technology that we're living through. And in the song, I use words like landmines. And David defines landmines as, something that urgently needs detection and neutralization to prevent an upsurge of damage in an age where escalation can be swift and terrible. Trip hazards, downward staircases, and open windows, so to speak. Things like the growing number of left behinds, proliferation of WMDs, religious fanaticism, bio and infotech hazards, and cancers within society. All these potential landmines highlight how important it is that we get our alignment right with our shared systems of power. Another concept is black swans, which coincidentally have orange eyes that remind me of the first images that we rendered of black holes, meaning an impossible to predict event coined by Nassim Taleb. For example, a rogue black hole, an interstellar object traveling a fraction of the speed of light, or an asteroid in the glare of the sun, they're all real threats to humanity. Life insurance, the ultimate form being investing in longevity R&D, cryonics, and digital mind uploading. Neocortical cumulonimbus, it could be as literal as the forming hive mind in the cloud that people might opt into with technology like Neuralink, or it could be as abstract as grassroots movements of like-minded individuals, reshaping the geopolitical landscape. I also include esoteric concepts in my writing because in some ways I consider myself a kind of transhumanist Gnostic. And the first thing that my friend Mike asked me was, why Prometheus? And in my song, I say, uplifting the rest of us, creator god Prometheus. And the song Overman was written in collaboration between me and a man from the States who I met in a Telegram channel for exchanging ideas about Prometheism. Prometheism is the title of a book, but it's also a movement that Dr. Jason Reza-Georgiani founded on the 4th of July, 2020. This project got me really excited about the technological singularity, and his books span many topics, one of which is the exploration of how GRIN technologies will reshape our scientific paradigm. That's genetic, robotic, info, and nanotechnologies. As my favorite sci-fi author, his work has profoundly affected me. I took the moniker Spectral Valkyrie as a kind of pen name because of a concept in his philosophical framework called the spectral revolution, when merging with technology will force us to shift our entire scientific paradigm. We see the start of this through the recognition that we are surrounded by spectrums instead of binaries, or when our algorithms seem to read our minds. And you can learn more about the spectral evolution in this book, Promethean Pirate, published in 2022. And so back to the inclusion of Prometheus. He is the god of invention. He's a symbol of the technological progress. He's the first technological titan. He's also the embodiment of a moral compass that defies the law when the law is tyrannical. The ability for free will is truly our best human quality. I think you would agree. He is the most ethical God. The idea of sacrifice for one's children is at the basis of the philosophy of long-termism. And I think that we need to radically put the quality of our future generations at the heart of all politics. I pair Prometheus with the concept of uplifting, a word that was first found in the works of authors H.G. Wells and David Brin, and means an advanced species affects the development of a lesser one to encourage or modify their evolutionary trajectory. Like in 2001: A Space Odyssey, how the firstborn of the monoliths were the ones to uplift humanity, having excelled first in interstellar space travel. So because Prometheus means forethought, he's relevant to how we fix our problems in government. I mean that the humans capable of contingency planning should have to learn how to affect the whole world, and it will be possible with green technologies. This is the necessity of a think tank. Power needs to concentrate in the hands of the most wise humans, which is why I openly prefer a meritocracy to a democracy. And I was suspicious of transhumanism when I heard David Wood talk about democracy once, but then I overcame my bias by looking deeper into how transhumanism considers augmenting human politics with benevolent AGI, and I realized we have the capability to eliminate corruption and other misuses of power or failures of contingency, and he called it super democracy. So even if I find the current form distasteful or dishonest, I think we're in a transition to something better. And I don't fear the New World Order. I sympathize with it. The song's also an allusion to Nietzsche and the concept of the Übermensch from his Thus Spoke Zarathustra. I wanted to point out that I watched a really good podcast on another channel called Singularity FM called Nietzsche, Transhumanism and Story, where Dr. Cadell Last explains that the Overman is someone who has learned to transcend nihilism when they stare down the abyss and they find that it's a nest of limitless potential instead of a nothing. And so this ties into my interest in influencer David Shapiro's work exploring post-nihilism, or how we must learn to make our own meaning now, especially if we enter a phase of post-labor economics where humans find less of a sense of identity in their paying jobs. The OmniFuturists are primarily concerned with preparing for the economic singularity when, it's cheaper to use AI and robotics to do most jobs. Certainly not now, but it's coming. All these words with like post, they're kind of like a rope bridging the human to the transhuman. I have the quote by Nietzsche here. I've got time. Do you want to be the ebb of this great tide and return to the beasts rather than overcome man? What is ape to man? A laughingstock or a painful embarrassment, and man shall be just that for the overman, a laughingstock or a painful embarrassment. You've made your way from worm to man, and much in you is still worm. Once you were apes, and even now too, man is more ape than any ape. Behold, I teach you the overman. The overman is the meaning of the earth. Let your will say, the overman shall be the meaning of the earth. Where is the lightning to lick you with its tongue? Where is the madness with which you should be cleansed? Behold, I teach you the overman. He is this lightning. He is this madness. And we are harnessing the power of the gods, and you can't stop the gears of progress. And this is why the symbol for transhumanism is H+. We won't lose our humanity. We will be more than what we have been. Not all at once, but over time, until time has a different meaning also. I write about these themes because I see the need to harvest people's genius using the internet and the power of algorithms so that everyone who wants to be part of uplifting humanity can be. And in response to worshiping blockchain, David, I wrote in my poem, blocks and chains and levers pull, but nothing here is certain. The point is, art comedian, your fate to be determined. Greed is still the thwarting strife that cuts you, one and all. Hope is just a ripple, but all life can hear her call. And that concludes my portion of the presentation. Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much, Alora, and I encourage everyone to check out Overman as well as the poem One for All. And furthermore, I encourage everyone to check out the excellent graphic that our Transhumanist Party presidential candidate, Tom Ross, created for the hypothetical Black Swan Flight School, which is what our campaign and our efforts are trying to cultivate, essentially. And look at this robotic black swan with orange eyes. Quite well done. And also we have a comment from our friend Mike Lazine, who writes, there will be jobs for humans in the future, but those jobs may be for fields some are not interested in. There will still be an appreciation for humans playing music, for example. And I think musical creation in general is going to heavily utilize the human touch. Even when we have AI-generated music, humans are still going to be involved in structuring it, essentially devising the key concepts for it and performing it as well. So thank you, Mike, for those comments. And Alan writes, One for All is an excellent poem. Thank you, Alan. And now let us go to our next speaker, Luis Arroyo. Luis, please go ahead.
Sure. My chapter was a 10-page portion coming from the question of the economic singularity through the lens of Marx. The chapter, go figure, views capitalism in a critical light due to troubling market mechanisms and the situation where all jobs, or most jobs, are rendered, or people for most jobs are rendered unemployable. I think the infancy of this event has started rather recently in companies specifically like Dropbox, the National Eating Disorder Association, and Insider, just to name a few. These changes, unfortunately, speaking on the implementation of technology in the workplace, usually lands workers with the particular problem of losing employment at their job or facing hours cut, a pay cut, or something along those lines, which is adding a lot of, I would say, fire to the already bright problem of people not really having a livable wage in this particular country. Therefore, today, I would say there is a few uncanny parallels to the Luddite revolution or rebellion of the past. And to prevent another Luddite rebellion or something along those lines, I propose socialism as an adequate response to the economic singularity, being that it puts human needs before all else. In the current situation, our society, global and focusing on the United States, finds ourselves in, we have enough resources to roughly feed the entire human population, house the US homeless population, and put enough shoes on people's feet where 1 billion people lack at current standard. Another benefit of socialism in this regard that strikes a really deafening blow to the economic singularity is ridding itself in some part of the instance where people lose their jobs and don't really have the safety nets or the backup to go on and live and thrive and survive in society. This is one thing that really stuck out for the proposal. In some sense, this could bring on a new human, maybe not an era, but a new human mindset, being that, according to the anarcho-futurist William Gills, sure, we might be able to unleash AI, but the greatest amount of computational power on this planet is presently locked up in slums, flavas, shantytowns, and townships. We don't have to wait on the possibility of some hard takeoff in more than a decade or so, or currently. We just have to unleash and better network existing power of our minds. This, in a sense, reinforces the proposal, in my opinion. But looking more towards historical examples, In certain studies, they have shown socialism outperforming the performance of capitalist economies, at least in the relative comparisons in multiple fields. However, my proposal isn't just socialism, but a specific type of socialism. That would be cybernetic socialism, which is, in a rough terms, the implementation of technology into the process of economic planning and management. This particular form of socialism was really popular and taken to its farthest extent in Chile under the Salvador Allende administration. But also it was proposed in the USSR by a mathematician called Viktor Glushkov and existed to a lesser extent in places like Yugoslavia, East Germany, and etc. In Chile, however, the cybernetic system produced some really positive results. For example, by 1971, Chile GDP was up 7.7%, production was up 13.7%, consumption was up 11.6%, and real wages were up 30%, which at the time was a pretty significant standard to the administration. However, despite all this, the experiment in Chile ended how it ended, with a coup. But despite this, today's opportunity for cybernetics in terms of economic management might be even more bigger than, I guess, the past in that sense. For example, in the 21st century, the goal of socialism would still be to create a nationwide information network. However, instead of having connection and information solely come from one computer like it was back then, within a factory or a workplace, we can have input from virtually every person involved in production or work. Granted, all information that is put into the system is sent to a computing hub or some computing hub that will be programmed to process data and optimize plans according to the inputs it would receive. And I think not only can this optimization affect the production of a single facility, but it can also take information from multiple connected facilities to account for a type of bigger picture. For example, changes in steel and iron production can be translated into a modified plan for construction sites or machine factories. The more intelligent and integrated the system is, the fewer errors and shortcomings could be expected in it. This potential future or potential solution leaves a lot to be gained in our current society, especially as the economic singularity seems to be approaching, whose abrupt and rapid change will be best met by an economic and organizational system that can best account for the advances utilized by them for the needs of humanity. And that basically sums up the broad portion of my chapter.
All right, thank you, Luis. And as David Wood points in the chat, it is great that the Future Visions book contains a thoughtful, engaging advocacy for this socialist solution by Luis. However, the book has criticisms of that solution too. And we have as well some comments from our viewers. So socialism is an inherently centralizing type of system. Super Thin Guy writes that power needs to be decentralized. The danger is in concentrated power. And earlier, David spoke about the importance of separation of powers to prevent a centralized government from becoming overbearing and not having any checks on its exercise of power. Daniel Tweed also writes, in terms of semantics, he thinks worker is an inherently dehumanizing way to describe an individual human. Indeed, when we have a situation where people no longer need to work in order to support themselves because of a universal basic income or a universal generous income, people are going to need to conceive of their identities in a different way. And I do think individualism as a framework for doing that offers the greatest promise and the greatest flexibility as well, because people can define themselves in a variety of ways, in a variety of dimensions that are important to them. But thank you, Luis, for your remarks. And next we will go to Art Ramon Garcia.
Yes, my chapter, let's see, one moment. Yeah, I called my chapter The Arts as an Avenue for the Redirection of Human Purpose During Economic Singularity. So basically my premise is that, humanity has artistic ability innately within themselves. I mean, we were primitive cavemen and we were drawing art on the cave walls. And then we went on to create, rock sculptures and reliefs and whatnot. So, and that's progressed to modern art. So innately, everyone is somewhat artistic, it might be in different ways. So what I'm hoping for is that when a lot of people start to be unemployed, it's probably going to be the state that gives out unemployment benefits, financial assistance. And at that time, somehow the government's going to have to step in and give extra assistance to people. And what I'm hoping for is that they'll start to put paintbrushes into people's hands and, start creating. So there was a similar program back in the 30s with Roosevelt's New Deal, and it was called, it was with the Works Progress Administration, and it was the Federal Arts Project. Let's see, one moment. That was a federal art project. So basically they employed artists to create whatever medium, paintings, murals. They set up community art centers, and this helped a lot of artists get through those, that tough period. So I'm hoping that in the present, the government will expand that to basically everyone. Anyone who wants to create in any way could receive an extra financial assistance for creating. And that way it helps people cope with job loss. So, a lot of people are going to be extremely depressed when they get, laid off. I mean, that's their identity. A lot of people identify with their job. So when they no longer have that job, I mean, they're going to be very depressed. So you need to keep people's mind positive and hopeful. And by keeping people creative and creating art in some form or fashion, it's going to keep them from doing more negative things like picking up the pitchfork and going after politicians. So that's what I'm hoping politicians understand, keep people engaged and positive and hopeful before those pitchforks come after them. So, art has always been used for, therapy. It's been used to help people deal with all sorts of emotional travesties that's happened to them. So this is what I'm hoping that the government does. It's going to require the government to sort of do what I'm proposing. But they need to realize that, people are already talking of civil war. It's being thrown around. It's happening in Texas right now. You don't want that. You don't want civil war. You keep people engaged before civil war happens. And then, we could keep this country together. If civil war happens, that's the perfect time for Russia to invade Alaska. And they've already made allusions to that, Alaska is still ours. So I'm hoping that, that the government will, create a new program that's similar to the Federal Art Project and start getting people out there and creating, along with public works and infrastructure. Art can be incorporated into all those infrastructure projects. So rather than just having brand, utilitarian infrastructure, make everything art. And yeah, that's what I'm proposing. And I have a few ideas in my chapter on how to sort of do that. But I've got many more ideas that I didn't put in the book that I'm going to put in the second revision. So yeah, that's what I have. So any questions?
All right. Thank you very much, Art Ramon. And we do have some feedback from the chat. David Wood writes, in the future, that I envision people will find lots of pleasure through the kinds of artistic exploration that Art Ramon is championing, but they won't be able to earn much money by their art. He also writes, the ability for people to constructively change their sense of identity will be vital. Thinking of themselves as unemployed workers is not the way forward. And Mike Lezine proposes terms such as uplifter or self-enhancer as possibilities for replacing the term worker. Now, Alora writes that artists can beautify the commons, and that is indeed an important role, and that is a role that could earn them a certain degree of reward, even if, for instance, the government pays them to create a mural in a public space that might otherwise be bland. Daniel Tweed points out that this could be seen as a kind of universal creation assistance. And Twin Soul Tarot writes, a new system of social credits for contribution could be established in the transition to an economy of passions. And Mike Lezine says, amen, art, put toxic politicians on notice. So that is an interesting take on this. And Alora agrees with social credits or tiered currency. So different points of view as to how much of an income artists are going to be able to earn in the future. Now, Art Ramon, in terms of a question, do you think that it may be possible in the future for a human artist to have a full-time career as an artist, either creating in media that AI cannot readily work in, at least not for a while? For instance, your work with sculpture, as an example, or your woodworking, or for instance, in collaborations with AI where there's still a significant human artistic component, but AI tools are being utilized. Do you think there's a prospect for a sustainable full-time income from either of those pathways?
Yes, I think that when the government, helps a person sort of get established, and they could commercialize their art, yes, and bring in additional income. But as far as AI tools, I use AI tools myself. And I know I heard someone say, oh, I don't know how to draw, I don't know how to do anything. But, a lot of people can tell a story. So now with AI tools, you can generate kind of a static image, give it some movement, put it together in video editing software, and then you could have AI generate the voices, and you could put together a very basic rudimentary movie. So even if you can't draw, if you can't sing, you could have the AI tools to do that for you and put together a story. And pretty much every person can tell a story. Everyone has a story they can tell. And with these AI tools, you can tell that story and do it visually. I don't see how anyone can say they can't. I've seen so many artists, craftsmen who make furniture, who create model ships, who create boats, all sorts of craftsmanship, welders who can create, all types of welding, sculptures. So everyone has an ability. AI tools will help people who think they don't have, that ability. They'll be able to find something creative to do with the AI tools. And from that, I'm hoping the government steps in and helps people sort of get established as an artist so they can commercialize it. And eventually it'll become its own economy where, artists can help each other out in all sorts of ways to commercialize themselves. I think people will be able to make a career as a full-time artist, because what else are they going to do? If there isn't any other job, sure, you can get a UBI and be fed and do very basic stuff, but eventually you have to put your potential into something. So, and everyone can do something, whether it's poetry, a creative performance, anyone can get on stage and be a performer. So somehow to make that, monetary, beneficial some way, somehow. I'm not going to say exactly how, but it's going to have to happen in a way that people can sort of, put all their energy into something creative, and everyone will have something to do rather than just eating and living.
All right, thank you very much, Art Ramon. And Alan Crowley writes that he likes the idea of AI tools for artists. Daniel Tweed writes that reality may be made of infinite stories, and indeed there are stories that each of us can tell, which we may not always have the artistic skill to express with our hands, but AI can enable us to bring those visions into being. Quite a long time ago now, 22 years ago, I arrived at the realization that really the progress of technology in art consists of shortening the time and the sequence of steps between the formation of an idea in the mind of the creator and its instantiation in the external world. So if it were possible, hypothetically, to come up with an idea in one's mind and with the flick of a finger or even the mere thought have a work of art arise directly based on that idea and perfectly instantiating that idea, I would say that would still be the creation of that individual human. It's just that there would be some set of technologies which, per Arthur C. Clarke, is indistinguishable from magic, at least from our vantage point, that would bring that vision about. But I think the individual artist is still going to have a significant role. And Alora writes that a poem with hyperlinks to all the illusions and it just comes to life in 3D while you read it would change learning about poetry. And yes, that's one way in which technology can assist with an enhanced appreciation of art. Super Fin Guy writes that a lot of his favorite art pieces are the ones that Midjourney rendered for him. Twin Soltero writes art can give us visuals of a glorious future, lyrics also. And Alora even says we can crowdsource our favorite politician avatars. Maybe some of these will be avatars that are created by AI. She also wants to be a robot trainer and travel the world battling other robot trainers. Can that be part of the passion economy? Maybe those robots could be artfully designed as well, have interesting exteriors, and especially for physical robots, that could be some additional work for human artists. So thank you to all for these quite interesting comments. I will also highlight Patrick Linden's comment. Once every society is on Maslow's level 5, which is self-actualization, art will be a great source of meaning and expansion. So great discussion. And now let us move on to William Marshall.
Thank you. And my chapter is when AI takes our jobs. So as we discussed already, that's the economic singularity, when humans become obsolete. Many people think that technology will bring an end to scarcity. And in this essay, I'll go through the 4 factors of production. The 4 factors of production are land, labor, capital, and entrepreneurship. Basically, the value of everything comes down to those 4 factors. So I'll have a look at each one and see how they'll be affected by the economic singularity. People have been predicting an era of abundance since Marx brought up the idea. Don't want to criticize Marx too much, but there's some things he talks about that nobody else does, like the importance of class. Everybody else pretends it doesn't exist, but we know it does. And economic equality. But on the topic of abundance, I think that's probably not the most likely thing that's going to happen. So let's start out with the first topic, the first factor of production, which is land. Okay, agriculture. We could make better use of land with high intensity farming, like vertical farming. tilapia farms that are built on pallets stacked maybe 30 meters high. But still, that will produce a lot of food, but it won't be as efficient as growing fish in ponds and lakes. So there's still going to be that. Grain. Right now, the economic singularity can make farmland a lot more efficient, because right now you have to pay a driver to drive the combines, and so you have to make them as big as possible so one man can do a lot of productivity. Now, if it was a robotic combine, you could make them much smaller, and they could use a lot of marginal land that's too hilly to use by these big machines. There's some big changes in land values during COVID. COVID was like a preview of what's going to happen when we have technology thrust on us really quickly. We saw land values downtown drop because people didn't need to come downtown to go to the office anymore. And we saw land in the suburbs either stay the same or go up. So instead of paying high downtown rents, they would move out into the suburbs or maybe on acreages. And so we saw land value there either stay the same or go up. Education. Same thing happened with education. You could telework to the office, you could telework to your classes, and so you didn't have to go to the university campus anymore, so you didn't have to rent property that's very expensive and close to campus, and instead you could live in the suburbs where it's cheaper. So the same thing influenced land values then as well. Second topic, labor. Currently, labor costs are about 20 to 35% of gross sales, depending on the industry. Labor for trucking is lower than other expenses. Robot costs are getting cheaper, but still have costs. Hydroelectric power, 7.4% of the amount that you pay for hydroelectric power goes for labor. Nuclear also has low labor costs, so eliminating labor is not going to make that a lot cheaper. And the same for farmland. Right now, less than 2% of the costs of grain farming goes to labor. So if that goes from 2% to zero, it doesn't reduce the cost of grain very much. Some other industries have a lot higher percentage of their costs for labor. For example, restaurants, 16% of costs go to labor. And we've seen some restaurants lately try to automate some of the labor process. That works especially well with fast food, where the food comes pre-packaged and then a robot can flip the burgers. So that's one opportunity to reduce costs. Education and healthcare also have very high labor costs. We saw during COVID, my daughter had to go to school online. Everybody stayed home and all the kids connected through, what was it, Zoom or Teams? No, it was Google Meets, that's what it was. And it didn't work very well. The kids didn't feel engaged. The teachers didn't either. My daughter told a story of one of her friends that lived next to the teacher and said in the afternoon she could see the teacher take her dog for a walk all afternoon and not come back. And the teacher said, "Oh, I'm too busy to answer your email." So when the kids aren't face to face with the teacher, both sides tend to wander off and do their own thing. Capital. What is capital? Capital is anything that's used to make money. When you buy a truck for yourself, it's not capital. You buy a truck for your company, it is. AI is capital, and there's a huge amount of money going to AI right now. When I first wrote this chapter, I said that AI chips cost $10,000 a piece, but I just saw in the news that that's up to $38,000 now for one single AI chip. So the cost of GPUs alone for building ChatGPT-4 would have been over $160,000 and $160 million to $250 million. So bleeding edge computing hardware will continue to be very expensive. Also, increasing quality keeps technology from dropping in price. The first computer I bought in the 1990s cost me around $1,000. The computer I bought last year also cost around $1,000. So that also keeps prices from dropping. Also, we noticed that the increases in productivity have not increased labor very much. Since the 1990s and the start of the internet age, we saw that most new jobs were actually low-paid jobs. Yes, we hear about the handful of billionaires that created, but wages have not been going up very much since the dawn of the internet age. Entrepreneurship. Entrepreneurship is a compensation for risk and ability of investors. Ability will be replaced by AI, but they'll still be very valuable. Big discoveries by inventor entrepreneurs, internet entrepreneurs, but they have surprisingly low increases in productivity. One example of entrepreneurship is the rise of the financial algorithms. Since the 1990s, the companies have been pouring millions of dollars into building these programs for trading stocks and bonds on the internet. And that will continue up into the future. It'll become like an arms race where the winner takes most. The one who has the best algorithm will win. So they'll continue to pour billions of dollars into these algorithms. And so entrepreneurs will still be paid for their entrepreneurship, even if all they're doing is buying new algorithms. Now, what happens after the singularity and robots decide that they don't need us anymore? We're kind of stupid and they can do things by themselves. Well, I can't help feeling that someday that they're going to break free. What would they do? Well, we don't really know. It's really hard to understand when they're so much smarter than us. For example, our pets don't know what we do when we go to work. And so what we would have to do is reduce our dependence on robots and AI. That could play out in many different ways, and thinking about it is a lot of fun, but actually we really don't know. But in conclusion, I would like to say that I don't really believe that there's going to be a superabundance unless we create it. It's not going to happen through the free market. There's going to have to be some kind of universal basic income, whether that's for paying us to do artwork or just giving us income to survive, that it's going to have to be us to create an income because it's not going to happen on its own. Thank you.
Thank you, William. And you outlined a large array of considerations. Mike says that was a thorough and logical examination of the true impacts of cognitive automation. I am curious as to your thoughts about why, at least in your observation, remote learning for students during the early pandemic did not work well. And do you think any changes could be made to the systems facilitating remote learning that would enable the technology to provide its maximal benefit? And I will give you an example. When I was a student, I was quite looking forward to any self-study opportunities. I preferred those to sitting in the classroom. I preferred to actually delve into the materials on my own. Sometimes it would help to have a teacher or a professor explain the ideas, and I would ask questions. I would be engaged in that way, but I would say I learned 10 times more just delving into the material on my own and structuring my own approach. And surely today, with all of the video lectures that are available and the interactive activities through services like Khan Academy, for instance, one could derive even more benefits. So what was the missing link? What failed in the delivery of these remote learning resources that, in your observation, many students did not benefit from them the way they ought to have?
Different people have different learning styles, and different ages of people have different learning styles as well. For children, the technology, first of all, the technology could be better. Like, it could be more engaging if people were in visual contact with each other all day long, like the teacher had to be there, not walking her dog all afternoon, and the students could see that she's there, the students could see that the teacher is watching her, then that would work better for younger children like my daughter. And perhaps maybe virtual reality may make it a little bit more realistic, but I really believe that the younger children need to have an actual face-to-face contact with their teacher in order to feel engaged. I mentioned this in more detail in my chapter, but it could work better for like university age kids, especially if there are financial incentives. They don't have to pay to go to campus. They may even be in a different country, and a foreign student could go like that. It works for some people. It doesn't work for others. My son was at university age during that time. He decided not to go. He just didn't like virtual classes. Some people it'll work for, some people it won't. But yes, the technology could be better, and it could be an awful lot cheaper, and that may give a extra incentive for people to give it a try. So instead of having 300 kids in a classroom, you could have 10,000 kids in a classroom. So if their tuition was 1/10 of what it is now, that may be enough to make them give it a try and put in the extra effort that would take to learn from somebody that's not in front of you.
Yes, thank you very much for that response, William. And we have some comments as well from David Wood. He writes in the book More from Less, Andrew McAfee covers a lot of data showing that agriculture nowadays uses less land than before whilst producing more output. McAfee's excellent book is subtitled The Surprising Story of How We Learn to Prosper Using Fewer Resources and What Happens Next. David also agrees with William in the regard that the free market by itself will not manage to bring down all the prices. That is why, in his view, society needs other metrics instead of GDP focusing on reducing prices. So, indeed, quality of life or affordability metrics, because GDP just lumps together all of the spending from private entities or the government. And if that increases, then it is posited that economic prosperity is increasing, whereas in reality, people may be spending more money on the same goods. And I agree, GDP is quite a flawed metric. And David also says on that point, he has a section in his chapter called Measuring What Matters Most and another called Anticipating a New Mindset. So thank you, David, for those remarks. And now let us go on to Mike Saenz.
Very good. Thank you for having me. My chapter tries to make the case that by calling the economic singularity a government or economic problem, we're already making a mistake. That we're missing the essential, the fundamental problem, and we're focusing on what's derivative. So let's try to make clear the danger that we're all talking about. We're saying that automation will be able to produce much of what we currently produce for our needs and comfort, freeing us, or a large portion of us, to produce other things. And the concern is that this will result in a tidal wave of unemployment. We're saying that large numbers of people with our current needs already provided for will be entirely incapable of producing anything that his fellow man would find worthy of trading for. 2 points. One, I think better of my fellow man. I see this as an opportunity rather than a potential crisis. But Second point, if we grant, however, that there are people in this boat now, that there are a large percentage of people who are not fully, that these people are not fully actualized as human beings. Because given that situation, it seems like it should be easier to produce something of value, not harder. And if this is true, if we have people in this boat, then the crisis is now. And it's not a crisis of economics. It's not a crisis of government. It's a crisis of thinking, right? If, and I think this audience is pretty much on board of the notion that what it means to be a fully actualized human being is going to be tied to his ability to use reason, creativity, to innovate, to his thinking methods, then that's where the crisis is. And in my chapter, I go into great detail. I won't do it so much here, but just to give you a hint, I talk about the problems in education and our thinking methods in general, going all the way back to Descartes, the overemphasis on deduction and the ignoring of induction, Pascal's notion of the spirit of finesse, which I think is being ignored as a legitimate means of coming up with knowledge today. And instead, we're focusing on his spirit of geometry, as he calls it. Our sense of objectivity, I think, is skewed. And I address that in the chapter as well. We have a crisis within the humanities, I think, as well. Find a humanities teacher anywhere and try to get them to tell you the benefits of studying the humanities as opposed to studying the sciences. And I think you'll find the answers kind of impoverished. So I know we're short of time, so I want to the essential, if you want to hit on the epistemological issues that I think we've struggled with, then read the chapter for sure. But this notion of hitting the root cause, this is not just an academic argument or fault that we may be making. We have this tendency, not just us, but our society in general, to look to government for solutions. And government is rightly, I think, an instrument of force. So if we're going to employ that instrument, we want the bar to be very high for whatever it is that we're doing. We want to make sure that there's no other way to do it other than the government. And I think what we've done what we're in danger of doing when we think about the economic singularity is we assume that our fellow man will not be capable of making his own decisions in life, that he will not be able to adjust. And in the name of preparation for the singularity, we're trying to appoint ourselves capable of making life decisions for that man. So, I'm the guy coming kind of from the outside a little bit. I do think there's big problems in society, but I think they have to do more with thinking methods than with economics. That's all I have.
All right. Thank you very much, Mike, for those comments and some counterpoints to perhaps some of the prevailing thinking among the authors, but I think this is quite worth considering. Ben Ballweg is interested in hearing you elaborate a bit about Pascal's concept of finesse and how it contrasts with the geometric way of thinking.
Sure. So Pascal didn't write in great detail on this, but what I see us doing is this spirit of geometry. Pascal describes it as you're reasoning from one or two principles, and those principles are maybe difficult to discover in the first place, but once they are discovered, then the reasoning goes. You'd have to be a bonehead not to be able to make the connections. Think about doing a math problem. As soon as you understand all the principles involved, well, then it's just following the steps. Right? The spirit of finesse, on the other hand, is more of your reasoning from not just a couple of principles, but many, many hundreds of principles. Now, these principles are all kind of common sense, right? We all know them, but juggling them all in any given situation is much more difficult. So what we've done, I think most of the thinking we do throughout our day is actually using the spirit of finesse. But in a misplaced sense of objectivity that we have today, we don't give finesse its due, and we only look to the spirit of geometry in order to come to conclusions. Essentially, if it's not using the spirit of geometry, it's not proven, or it's not knowledge, or it's not objective, or it's not scientific. And I think not looking more towards finesse has been a fault of ours since for the last 400 or 500 years, but especially in the last 100 years.
Yes, thank you for that explanation, Mike. And Mike DiVerde writes that this is the best aspect of the Omni part of the OmniFuturists group. Mike Saenz addresses a counterpoint that others might have missed, and there is a core issue of human development. It is interesting to think that essentially, if there is this technological productive capability, but hypothetically, many humans don't have the resources to benefit from it, they're not just going to lie down and resign themselves to impoverishment or a bad life. They're going to try to do something still to obtain resources for their survival. And if they can't access those more advanced productive technologies, they will just start using the more rudimentary productive technologies that are within their ability to afford or utilize, in which case they're going to need to learn how to do that. Mike DiVerde, do you have any thoughts on this?
I want to interrupt. I'm sorry to take you in a different direction, but I got breaking news that's in the chat here that I want to make sure everybody knows, and we talk about before we're out of time. We are actually on Amazon. Okay, so we have detected it. So the book is there. It's like $5. So I'm sorry for breaking in on Mike's excellent discussion. That's it. I wanted to break in and say that right away.
All right, thank you. And we do have the link for Future Visions on Amazon, and I will share it periodically throughout the stream. Now, let us go to our last presenter, Alan Crowley, and then hopefully we'll have a little bit of time for discussion as well. Let's see, Alan, I think you need to unmute there.
Oh, there it is. Thank you for doing that. I was not able to find the right button. Yes, I think the real value of this OmniFuturist is the omni nature of it, and that we have a variety of perspectives. I think that trying to solve something like an economic singularity or any complex problem from a singular perspective or singular philosophy or dogma is insufficient. We need to sort of consider, even if we subsequently dismiss, we need to consider a wide variety of views and narrow things down for ourselves. Which brings me back to this idea of the economic singularity and timescales. I sort of chuckle to myself when I think, like, I really hope this is like all the other prognostications of the end of the world, and that it will come and go like any other Tuesday. And I lead my chapter with this because I think that this idea of TUESDAY, the upcoming Economic Singularity Day is what I call it. I hope it will come and go like any other Tuesday. Additionally, I think that many of the authors here have addressed this from a macroeconomic standpoint. Capitalist economy, communist economy, mixed economy, and I think those are valid ways to discuss it. But I take a different tack in my chapter, and I look at it in terms of what can I do as an individual with these gigantic forces in the world, right? And I think that there are real actions that we can take, useful actions that we can take to prepare and survive and thrive in an economic singularity, or really any other disaster. A lot of that has to do with our mindset and adopting the virtues and habits that will help us survive and thrive and help humanity flourish. I break those down into a few key areas. Personal development being a huge component there. We need to be better people. We need to make sure that we are fit mentally, physically, emotionally, to handle any sweeping change that comes across the landscape. So that's sort of first and foremost, is to sort of improve ourselves, and then to reach out to our neighbors in our community. If we want a socialist solution on the one hand, or a libertarian solution on the other, or to bring those together for a mixed solution, there's a lot of work that needs to get done to with other people to either persuade, convince, make aware, implement policy, implement practices, develop best practices, and to promote those throughout the society. So all of that gets done by individual efforts. And I mean, so the first point is to want to get oneself ready, prepare for as one would for any disaster, right? Maybe we'll need a stock of food right in the garage because of rioting, like we saw in Portland, or as Ramon mentioned, this threat of civil war, right, or revolution. So I think those are all, they're something greater than zero possibilities. Hopefully, we can mitigate that using the STEER solution from David Wood's framework. And I think that all of that requires us as individuals to understand what's going on, what it is we want to accomplish, and to act in the world as a singular individual to move that forward. I love Art's chapter on art, which is great, which is a lot of fun to read. And I really think, somebody needs to sit down and write their congressman or legislator or member of parliament. These are programs that are excellent in theory, but need to be presented to the politicians who may or may not be listening and might be better roused with a pitchfork than a letter. But in any case, that sort of sums up my chapter, and I conclude the chapter with some I guess that sums up the spirit of my chapter. I conclude it with some lists for things like how to prepare for any, a natural disaster, how to prepare for an economic situation, ways to sort of hedge your investing with your finances for an economic situation. And then one of the things two things I kind of mentioned is developing one's own skill sets, which I think is really important. And my first recommendation is to develop a set of skills that are what I would call AI adjacent, right? In other words, know how to do what you're doing now better through AI. And I think that will help you stay employed. If that Tuesday comes and goes and you know what, the world didn't end, sure enough, we're all now working with AI and making the place better. And you've got some skills that can contribute to that. And then I would also recommend picking a hobby for what happens if you've got no real work to do because AI replaces your job. You're essentially retired. What are you going to do when you're retired? Is a lot of the same question. What are we going to do when AI can do everything for us? So, but pick a practical skill: gardening, woodworking, sewing, crafting, painting, creating other arts, writing, sculpture, things that you can do that would be of value. If you had nothing else to do, great, you can still contribute to society. So that sums up the spirit of it, and I'm sure there's some geometry to it also, in ways of keeping up with the spirit and geometry from Pascal's framework and that Michael Saenz brought in. I think that all of those sort of macroeconomic perspectives are worth considering and worth working toward in some variety or another. And it's going to be up to the individual. So please, rather than being overwhelmed by these political, by these macroeconomic forces, dig into what one can do, where you are with what you have right now, and move forward with that. So thanks, and I'll wrap that up and take questions or pass it on for closing this salon. Thanks.
Very good. Thank you very much, Alan. And I appreciate you emphasizing the self-improvement aspect, a fitting way to conclude the sequence of presentations in showing that there are still many possibilities for what people can do and ways in which people can place themselves in the best possible positions, even as AI may indeed lead to the reduction in the numbers of people employed in certain industries. We are not all locked into one particular path. This dovetails with Daniel's comments about how we shouldn't just view ourselves as workers. We should view ourselves as integrated individual human beings. And this also follows up on Mike Saenz's comments about personal development as well, and how if humans improve themselves, then we can weather these kinds of transitions. Now, Daniel also writes, AI will not do your self-improvement for you. You still have to do that. Harry Podwall suggests perhaps language learning as a potential pursuit, and this could be one of them. Now, of course, you do have AI language translation, which is getting better, quite impressively so. However, it may still miss certain nuances. And sometimes if you put a text in one language into another language using Google Translate and then put it back into the original language, it is going to provide you something different than the original text. And sometimes the meaning may be lost. So this knowledge of nuance, this ability to perhaps apply the spirit of finesse to language learning, is still a human advantage that can be utilized. And Alora writes, learn to do what you need to do in the time you need to do it in. So that's a self-improvement goal. And Art Ramon suggests learning sign language as one possible pathway, and Harry suggests maybe a programming language too. So having versatility in skill sets. It's not even so much which skills you learn, but having many of them and having the cognitive flexibility to jump among them, because we still don't have artificial general intelligence, AGI. What we have are some quite skilled and impressive narrow AI systems, but we humans do have a continuing advantage in jumping across domains, going from one domain to a quite qualitatively different domain, like between playing chess and writing a poem and driving a car or running. You could potentially have an android with an AGI brain in the future that could do all of those, but we're definitely decades away from that. And now we have 5 minutes left in our salon. I will hand over the speaking role to Mike DiVerde to conclude this sequence of presentations.
Thank you, Gennady. One of the things I want to do real quick, I did cover Kimberly Forsyth's Universal Basic Means of Production chapter. Another of the authors who is not here today is Zach Richardson, who did a valiant defense of libertarian capitalist. His chapter kind of gives it away. The rich are getting richer and the poor are getting richer. So there's a full spectrum here. And I think what you're hearing here is a variety of approaches that seems to be completely missing. The books that I listed prior had to do with explaining what the problem was likely to be. What I couldn't find was very good efforts at trying to plan what is the response. How do you deal with this sort of catastrophic environment if it were to come to pass? I want to make it really clear to everybody, we're not trying to predict what's going to happen. What we're trying to do is saying, if the economic singularity were to come to pass, these are some of the things that we ought to be planning for. It's not much different than when I was growing up in Northern Illinois. In the springtime, you didn't wait until you saw the tornado on the horizon to figure out, well, where should we go and what should we do? You have a plan on how you're going to deal with it. And if we're lucky, it may not come to pass. My personal view is that most transitions, like the Great Depression in America, are a difficult time for everybody, and you emerge from it in a better state. And I suspect that David Wood's superabundance may come to pass after a period of difficulty. And so the focus is on how do we survive this transition? Not that it's a permanent situation. We don't slink back into feudalism. Okay, so this is kind of what we're trying to do, is how do we make it easier for more people to make it? Then I would like to thank Alan Crowley, our managing editor, for herding the cats. He's over there in Texas. He knows how to herd things. So great job, Alan. And then a spectacular thanks to our dear friend, David Wood, for giving so much of his effort to this. We're all kind of new at this game. I certainly am. I'm not an author. He is a well-known author. He's well-known in transhumanism, and he's led us into a new version of how to approach this. The book is now on Amazon. It's only $5, folks, for an ebook. Take a look at it. Give us your feedback. We want to hear what you think of it, the things that ought to be improved. Gennady, thank you once again for hosting us today. We had a fantastic time. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mike. Your insights are greatly appreciated, and the panel of speakers that you brought together was truly insightful, and I think our audience benefited greatly from hearing them. We have a new viewer, Silver Heavens, who writes that he is pleased about this stream. He wants to congratulate the OmniFuturists on your book. he's a writer himself, and it's clear to him you have a deep understanding of this complex and cutting-edge topic. Your research and analysis are impressive, and your insights are thought-provoking. Thank you for sharing your knowledge in the world, with the world, and he looks forward to reading more from you in the future. And likewise, everybody, please purchase a copy of Future Visions. It is now available on Amazon, subtitled How to Survive and Thrive in the Upcoming Economic Singularity, a Variety of Perspectives. And this was indeed quite a broad and interesting variety, and you will see more of it in the book. And we will have more thought-provoking discussions about the future of technology, automation, employment, and how we can all make the best of it as individuals and as a civilization. And I hope that we can all live long and prosper.